Okay, let's do this already. Hello. Welcome to anybody who might be a new listener, and thank you to anybody who's returning. My name is Jay Brown, and this is Yoga Talks Podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. I don't even know what to say. I had some things that I've been planning on for the last couple days, getting prepared to sit down and do this intro, and I don't feel like saying any of that stuff. I just feel like, I don't know, the motivation that I had, I've talked about it coming off of the inauguration. I felt this renewed sense of purpose because everything seems so messed up. Well, I feel like that motivation has waned some, at least this week. It was like some vacuum sucking it away from me, and it is the middle of February, but you wouldn't know that. A couple of days back, it was like 65 degrees one day, and then the next day, we had 15 inches of snow. But everything's fine, nothing to worry about. I don't know, it just seems everybody's still freaked out. I shouldn't say everybody. I'm freaked out on some level, and just sort of doing my best to carry on and hoping that things are going to go in a better direction or something. But it seems like it's not going in a good direction. Maybe there's other people out there who are seeing it different. They're seeing what I'm seeing, and they're happy. They think, everything is getting mixed up. Great, this is what we wanted. But I don't know. I mean, in my adult life, I've witnessed politicians lie. Like, they all lie. We know that, right? But it seems like in the past there was like a art to it of sorts. There was a way in which politicians would speak half-truths or sometimes full untruths, but they would do it in this kind of artful double speak so as to avoid having to take a black and white position on a nuanced issue. But nowadays there's no art or nuance to it. It's just like blatant disregard for any idea of the truth, or it's just completely delusional. Either way, it doesn't feel good. And I have to say, I'm getting some reports from the field out there. I guess people are associating this podcast with honest talk about what's going on, and I'm very happy for that. That is my intention. So sometimes when I'm hanging out with people, it seems like maybe they're a little bit more open to speaking candidly and honestly with me. And I guess I'm getting reports. I think some of the centers are having lower attendance, and people are having a hard time getting people to come to events, and there just feels like a reversion and a shell-shocked quality. And, you know, I remember when I opened my yoga center just over 9 years ago, it was right before that economic crash in 2007. I totally lucked out. The only reason I was able to open a center was because I managed to secure an SBA Community Express loan. Because I didn't have any money, but I had really good credit. So it was this program that was like a government-sponsored loan, but distributed by a private lender. And I managed to get that loan, like, I don't know what it was, like 4 months before the crash. And if I had applied even like a couple months later, because it took time to process, I don't think I would have gotten that loan. But that's how I managed to have the money to open a place. And, you know, we survived that time, even though everybody was like kind of freaked out and like the economy was in this weird tailspin and we thought like civilization might fall apart. At least here in New York and among like my artist friends, we didn't like own a bunch of stocks. We weren't making our living off capital gains. Yoga teachers, generally speaking, aren't making their money off capital gains. Maybe there's some smarter yogis out there than me, I don't know. But it didn't seem to have this like depressing effect on the yoga center. The yoga center grew throughout that time. People gravitated to the yoga center. It was like a place that people wanted to come for healing and perspective. But this time around, with this climate where things are feeling depressed, it doesn't feel like people are doing that. People are like, they're staying in and holding close. But I'm really looking to find ways to connect to people in the real world. That's what the theme has been in the podcast of late. But that's really hard to do when the way that you're feeling is you just want to hide. Like, if all I want to do is hide and like not have to put like my head in the sand, that makes it hard to like go out there and deal and get out of my comfort zone and make new kinds of connections or new choices. Not just keep doing the same thing that I've been doing, because that's no longer a sustainable direction. I'm going to have to make some changes. And you guys know, those of you who listen to the podcast from back when know that I have weighing questions that I haven't been bringing up, have I? I'm still compiling some important data, but it's getting close. It's getting close. I got to make some decisions about what's happening with the center and what's happening with me. And I guess I'm not prepared to make those definitive decisions yet, but I've got to. And maybe that's why this intro is the way that it is. I'm just looking at these notes that I took, and I don't know. I didn't want to hand you a bunch of bull. I wanted to speak to you true. And I want to, from that place, seek dialogue and insights from others, and we're going to do that today. I am talking to Dewey Turner and Carol Horton from the Yoga Service Council. They're doing some really incredible work over there at the Yoga Service Council. They just put out a new document. It's a best practices for yoga for veterans. And the process that they went through to bring about this document on best practices is really, I think, an interesting and valuable model. We talk about it. Also, Dewey has 19 years of service in the military, and she's also like somebody who can get down with energy healing, which is just an incredibly awesome combination to have in a human being. And I was very intrigued by that combination, and the way that she's able to marry those things is just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I really appreciated talking to her, and I'm really happy for you to get a chance to listen to it today. Before we do listen to that talk, let me plug some of my stuff. I'm going to be in Tarrytown, New York, February 26th at Riverstone Yoga. I'm going to be in Japan, both Tokyo and Osaka, March 18th through 26th. I'm going to be in West Hartford, Connecticut at West Hartford Yoga, April 30th. I'm going to be starting my teacher training here in Brooklyn, May 5th. And I'm going to be doing a week-long program at the Feathered Pipe Ranch in Montana, June 17th through the 24th. You can find out more about those gigs. You can listen back through the archives of this podcast. You can read my blog and find my video offerings at jbrownyoga.com. Thank you to everybody who sent me emails this week. I read those last week, and a lot of you chimed in. As always, I want to encourage you guys to feel welcome to reach out to me with your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, your challenges, just little glimpses of your life and moments when the podcast has fit into that. It's very rewarding for me to hear about that, and I want to encourage you to keep those communications coming. If you had a little extra time and you have enjoyed the podcast, maybe you would hook me up with a review and some stars on iTunes. And deepest gratitude for those who choose to make a donation. That is a very helpful gesture, and I am deeply appreciative. You can do that on any blog or podcast page. But really, your listening is more than enough, and I'm grateful that you are doing that. All right. What else? Nothing else. Let's go ahead and get to this talk today with Carol Horton and Dewey Turner. I'll hit you guys on the other side. How are you? Please, I don't know how to say your name. Is it Dewey?
Yes, it's Dewey, but to make life easier for the entire humanity, I go by Dewey.
All right. That's fair. I've got like a J thing too. My name's Jason. I go by J. I understand. Cool. Well, so good to talk to you guys.
Likewise.
How's it going today?
I'm it's a holiday, so I just kind of got up late and had some coffee and walked the dog, and, that's been the full extent of my day so far.
and you're in Chicago right now, is that right?
Exactly.
Kara?
So I'm an hour earlier than you two.
All right. And Dewey, where are you and what are you doing?
Great. Well, thank you. I am stationed. I live in Miami, but right now I'm in Orlando visiting my cousins and teaching them chair yoga and enjoying the surroundings. My mom is with me too, so it's great to be in a relaxed setting.
Cool. Well, it's fun for me to get a chance to talk to you guys today. I don't usually do like two people at the same time, but it makes sense for us in our conversation today. And Carol and I know each other. She's been on the podcast. And so I was hoping I could just take a moment or two to kind of get to know Dewey a little bit better because we've never met before.
That's right. Thank you.
Sure. So the first thing I noticed when I took a look at your bio was that you have some pretty extensive training in the healing arts, a number of things, yoga, tai chi, qigong, sound therapy. And then you also have many, many years of service in our Air Force. Mm-hmm. And I was curious, which one of those things came first? Were you into healing arts before you were in the military, or were you in the military first, or did they happen at the same time?
Well, I think is the influences came really from childhood for both. So I grew up in Brazil. I was born in New York, but I grew up in Brazil. And Brazil, as you might know, is a very esoteric place. People are very spiritual. They're, a fusion of different walks of religion and spirituality. So growing up, I grew up seeing and experiencing different religions. I flirted with Tai Chi. My mom had crystals at the house. So people reading cards. So that came from childhood, as well as the discipline, because I grew up when I was in Brazil, I went to Catholic school, uniform, discipline, certain things. So I think that both of those walks were always in my life. Then I was very blessed to a portion of my adult life in my career. I was stationed in Hawaii. And Hawaii turns out to be a very spiritual, esoteric place. And I was there, but working in the military. So I would go to work, and then outside of work, I did practice Tai Chi. I learned a little bit of Qigong. And that's where I got the Reiki, where I studied Reiki. And the crystal healing, I had a wonderful teacher who she's still my teacher. She lives in Bali now. But when we were in Hawaii, she taught crystal resonance, which is what I later learned, which is the big crystal bowls, the quartz bowls. And she lived in a banyan tree, at the top of a banyan tree. So I would work Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday go to the banyan tree, So,
wait, let me stop you for a second. So you're in the military and you're doing energy healing. See, that's what struck me. Is what were you doing in the military? When did you get into the military? How old were you when you got into the military, and what roles were you playing in the military?
Well, I was 20 when I joined, and I enlisted first, and I told you I grew up in Brazil, so when I came back to the States, English was very difficult for me. So science was what I did best in college. And as it turns out, I signed up to join the Air Force because I wanted to work in the space program and had a weather job. So I was a technician, a meteorologist.
Oh, I saw that you have a degree in meteorology. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was a weather technician. And believe it or not, my first assignment was Cape Canaveral.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So I did check that box, and eventually I went to Hawaii, and I was working also as a weather technician, and I was supporting the helicopters, and that's where out of Hawaii is where I deployed to Bosnia and Afghanistan, and also eventually ended up going to University of Hawaii. And while I was there working with the military, I was doing this, dual track, but it's really not a dual track, Jay. It's if you think about it, like a person that is very spiritual, that has a lot of introspection, has also a degree of discipline often in one way or another. Even if we see, I think the stereotype is someone very artsy and open, but there is a level of introspection, of soul searching and service. And if you think on both of those, you think of priests, monks, you think of yoga teachers who are, willing to serve at any cost. People that join the military kind of have that call to serve for something out there that's greater than oneself. So it's really not that difficult to unify both worlds.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you because I totally see that connection for like discipline and service. Like that makes sense to me. But the reason I'll be honest with you, the reason the question comes from is that my father-in-law, he's a retired admiral from the Navy. Also a pilot. He landed F-14s on aircraft carriers for many years. You know what I mean? He's like, and so that's my only kind of direct connection to the military. I don't know anybody else, but I've come to love him and know him over the years, and he's a totally open and wonderful guy, and he totally purports with what you just said, that connection. But at the same time, like, energy healing is a little bit more of an out there kind of thing. And is there a lot of people in the military who are into like more stuff like that than I would think? Am I wrong to think that those things don't usually always go together?
Yes, they usually don't go together, but they will. You know why they will? Because at a first glance, a person, a military guy, think, oh no, this is for sissies, this is girls only, or whatever stigma is out there, or turbans or whatever. Okay, but then they would come to class to experience it for one reason or another. They had a tough day, they heard that yoga might be helpful for, opening the hamstrings, and they just ran 5 miles or whatever. They show up, and, most of the time this will happen. It's like you have the experience, and undeniably is wonderful. And then they come back the next day, and they come back the next day, and little by little the door or, that wall, it starts disappearing, clumbering. They're like, I don't know why I come back here. I had that all the time. I don't know why I keep coming back, but it just feels so good. And then eventually you throw a chakra over there, and you talk about, a little yoga conference here. And that door opens more and more and more until the worlds connect. And it's really not that hard. Yeah. It's really connecting because, comes the service and all that's innate in the personalities of a yoga teacher, a yoga practitioner, and a service person. But also comes the release, like the comfort that comes with the practice itself. So it was very easy to. When I came to the Pentagon, we had one class. Well, they had one class on Wednesday nights. When I left the Pentagon, and not by my own doing, but for a group of people, we had 7 classes 5 times a week.
Wow.
Okay, and the classes were full because the Marines come because they feel their hamstrings are going to open, but eventually something else happens. It's not universal, but it happens to a lot of people.
Well, like people like to feel better.
People like to feel better, and yes, people like to feel better. You got it. That's it.
So when did it first come? When did you first start to bring yoga into your friends at the military? Well, first let me ask you, what was your first yoga experience? Where did you start yoga? Who was your teacher? What was the style? I always like to find out where people start in their yoga.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, when I was in Brazil, I told you earlier, I practiced a little bit of Tai Chi. Yeah. Then when I was at the University of Hawaii, I joined the longevity group, which when I signed up, I didn't know, but it was a senior citizens group for Tai Chi. And that was called the University of Hawaii, the Longevity Center. And I didn't realize that. So I just signed up for Tai Chi. When I show up, like I was 30 years younger than the average student. But that worked, and I practiced, and I thought that Tai Chi was extremely helpful. I was studying science, calculus, physics, chemistry. I needed that escape valve. After I graduated, my house was very far from the University of Hawaii, so I found a small studio that taught Tai Chi and yoga. I didn't know anything about yoga, but I went there because of Tai Chi. It turns out it was kind of a fusion, and it was really interesting, and I started experiencing yoga, and for some reason, I just felt very attracted to yoga more and more and more and more, and that's how I kind of dove into the world of yoga, eventually becoming a teacher because I was going to be stationed in Korea, and they didn't have yoga teachers, so I figured I should become a teacher myself.
I see. So wait a second. So you were going to have to go to Korea. You knew there wasn't going to be yoga teachers there, so you're like, I better become a yoga teacher quick before I get there?
Yes, that's exactly how it was.
I love that. That's amazing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. And so where did you do training?
My 200 hours I did in New York City at a place called Atmananda.
I know. What's his name? John, right?
John T. Yeah, John T. Which, happens that he was also in the military by coincidence.
Really?
In Colombia, he was in the military, and he started yoga because in Colombia he had to do all those the marches, etc., and the boots crumble his feet, and he got into yoga to open the body. I didn't know that. I just signed up because it was New York, had good reviews, and my family, lives in New York.
It was on Broadway, right? Was at that spot on Broadway?
Now they moved to Union Square. No, they moved again, so I'm not sure where they're at. Atmananda. So that was my 200 hours.
Okay, all right.
And then my 500 hours I did in Washington, D.C. at a studio called Tranquil Space.
Okay. All right. So at some point you have this yoga practice, you're in the military. When does it start to be that you become a teacher? So you said you became a teacher before you went to North Korea. When do you start teaching in the military?
Well, actually, I never went to Korea.
Okay.
Eventually, I never went to Korea. So
okay.
I started teaching immediately after I finished my certification, but I was just teaching 200 hours. Yoga back then wasn't like this huge movement. Was just teaching to whoever wanted to take a class with me. And then when I went to the Pentagon, I took a few classes, and I decided, a friend of mine was actually teaching it. I became friends with her. She was an excellent teacher. And when she left, I took her spot. And to me, I was just teaching yoga. It was very natural to me to teach in that setting. At the Pentagon, there are 27,000 people, and there are retirees, there are wounded warriors, there are active, full-body able people. So in my classes, people would come of all walks. So I would have like a retired, colonel, general. I would have a amputee, and I would have a 20-year-old Marine. So I had to make the class accessible to everyone. And that's when I started teaching adaptive yoga without even knowing I was teaching adaptive yoga.
Just by necessity, because you want to be a good teacher to people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah.
All right, and the people there at the Pentagon were into it.
People were into it, and then at that time was when I started, because I was just a single. There was a few other teachers, but we were kind of logs in a river, kind of going independently, and I felt the need to join a community. And that's really the reason why I signed up for the 500 hours, because I wanted to be part of a community of yoga teachers. And while I was doing that, with Tranquil Space and Kimberly Wilson, part of your 500-hour certification was to write a thesis. And I decided that I wanted to write about yoga and lifestyle, and candles and bubble baths. But someone in the class said, wait a minute, you're in the military and you're a yoga teacher. You should write about yoga and post-traumatic stress. Yeah. And my initial reaction was like, no way. This is so, it's depressing and stressful. No, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. But I left, went home, and I tell you what, Jay, I had a duty to do it. Even though I didn't want to do it, I felt like I had to. And that's how I got into particularly yoga for post-traumatic stress. for
Yeah.
veterans and active duty members.
I know that I have some friends who teach vets, and it sort of became that by necessity, you know? It's like, if you want to teach someone yoga and help them with their issues, and they've got post-traumatic stress, then that's what you have to be addressing. The yoga has to be for that, you know?
Exactly so.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask you another question then about that. That goes to something else I want to talk about, which is that it seems to me that vets do. I know this from other experiences as well. They have challenges that they face that other people don't face. And so maybe you could talk about that. Maybe you could talk about some of the things that are specific. Like even when I was looking at the best practices you guys put out, there was a whole section on like understanding military context, you know?
Right. Well, for one, just like being a priest or being a monk, we know you will never hear any active duty person saying, or even retiree, saying, hey, I work for the military. Everybody says, I am in the military. I am in the Air Force. There's like a whole package that comes with it. It's a whole lifestyle. Then that you're removed for your most familiar surroundings, and then you join this huge organization in the name of democracy, or because you want to travel the world, or whatever reason it is, and it really becomes your life. So for that, for once, is one difference that we have from a lot of other people who, I work for software. While I am in the military, I'm in the Air Force. So that's one. Two is, the constant stressors that some professions and lifestyles have that, but everyone in the military experiences that, which is the constant moving. Every 2 years or 3 years, for most of us, we have to pack our entire household, take your kids out of school. If you're dating someone, hey, can we date through over phone, or get married really quick and then move to a new place where you don't have friends, you have a new community. That's another stressor. Along with that comes the responsibilities of your job. I tell you, when I moved from California to Miami, as an example, and that happens to most of us, I had 10 days to find a house. In 2 weeks, I was full on working, like having dinners with the ministers or whatever job I had to do very quickly. You have to learn very fast. That's a lot of stress. And I don't have any children, but I can tell you, just my husband and I have to work those things, because I come home, I'm stressed, and there's the stress of the house. So that's another point. We deploy. We have to be ready at all moments. If you open my car right now, I actually have a helmet and a Cavalier, because we can deploy it at any time. We're ready. Our immunizations are ready. We're weapons certified. Blah blah blah. All that ready. If the military needs us, we'll go wherever we need to go. Like Haiti, we just have Hurricane Matthew in Haiti, and a lot of my peers, all of a sudden, we're all geared up. We're ready to work 24/7, and people that I know immediately went deployed to Haiti to assist within 24 hours. So those are the stressors. And then there's this stigma, right? That the military person is disciplined, is whole, it's unbreakable. And you want to live up to that as a man, as a woman. I mean, so there are all those additional stressors that I feel that a lot of people in the civilian world do not have. Some do, but not all.
And I know, I'm thinking of when you specifically talked about deployments, because I know my father-in-law, he would deploy for like months and months, sometimes 6 months at a time on the ships. And that just got to be hard to like come back and go and like transition between what your life is when you're deployed and what your life is when you're not deployed.
Absolutely, yes. For one, if you have children, you come back 6 months or a year later, you either have a new child that you just meet for first times already 4 months, or your child, imagine 1 year, they change so much. Your neighborhood changes. And we see so many things too, like in a different path. We see, when we're deployed, we see so many things. They're grotesque in a sense, like we're defending freedom, but we see, and we have a friend, and all of a sudden the guy goes outside the wire, or the girl, and they don't come back. And that was the guy who was sitting next to you. And we see all those things. We see how other societies work, and how this is not fair, and all those pressures. And then we come back home. And for instance, my experience coming back from Afghanistan, I came back, and I don't thank God I don't cope with post-traumatic stress, but I came back and I felt very resentful to Americans in general, because I would go to Starbucks and there's a guy upset because he's a star latte, he's, whatever latte is not done a certain way. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You have no idea what's going on in the world. And you really feel this resentment where you're like, you have no idea what people go through. You should be on your knees thanking the universe for the blessings you have. So you resent that. It's really interesting, because I'm not a resentful person or a negative person, but even even with my personality, which is a Maya personality, I also went through it. So imagine, a person has a very strong personality, a go-getter, and etc. Or it can be a very different experience. I think the best way to describe this to you, Jay, is once I saw a commercial where it was like a perfect description, was this guy who deploys and on his way out there, the world is colorful. He experiences war one way or another, or conflict. He comes back and he's on Broadway, and he looks and the whole world is black and white and he feels completely alone. And I think for a lot of us, when we come back, feels that way. You kind of feel removed and kind of trying to connect what you saw and what you experienced to what really the reality in our democratic, thriving country is like. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's really, that is really such a difficult challenge for any human being. And thank you so much for your service, Dewey.
Oh, thank you.
Well, and I guess that's really where yoga can be super helpful. You described that feeling of coming back and the world being black and white and feeling alone. And I know it seems like yoga practice, for me at least, in my life, has always been this way of touching base with like just the fact of my existence as like a nurturing force, mm-hmm. or just like the inherent wonder of being alive, and there's a connection feeling that happens in that, where I don't mm-hmm. feel alone.
Right.
And it makes sense to me that yoga practice could be a real profound help to someone who has those kinds of experiences.
Absolutely, I agree. And what's wonderful about yoga is that there is something about having a traveling mat, right? You don't even need a mat to have a traveling mat, to have a traveling yoga experience. Wherever you go, your yoga goes with you. So I love when I teach classes and people are in Shavasana, corpse pose, and I just remind them, I said, this feeling that you have right now can be with you anywhere in the world. It can be with you in any setting. If you practice for 15, 20 minutes to an hour, whatever, when you get to Shavasana, that feeling is with you everywhere. So you say that to a military guy or girl who's, the next week is preparing to deploy, they realize that. Wherever I go, I have that serenity, that calm, and that connection. You can be alone in a room, practice yoga, and still feel connected. And I think that's one element that yoga practitioners in the military specifically discover very quickly. And now, Jay, as we are, fostering the yoga practices and that idea, now not only you go with your yoga mat or your invisible yoga mat, there are others who now practice yoga. And then you start talking about yoga, and all of a sudden at 6 p.m. after your shift ends, you're like in the basketball court practicing yoga or something, And that community grows. It's magnificent. It's just wonderful.
Well, you talk about how you have a mat, and I saw this thing called what is a yoga readiness kit?
Oh, yeah. That's a wonderful
What's a yoga readiness kit? I saw that. I was like, oh, what's that?
Yes. So I think the idea comes from being ready, as I mentioned to you before. Every person on active duty or who is serving in an active role is ready to deploy. So that word is very familiar. You can ask, your family member, the pilot or the retired pilot, I say, mm-hmm. Hey, what is readiness? And he will go, I'm sure in this long thing, your immunizations are checked, your family has a plan, your bills could be taken care of. You're ready to deploy at all things. So it's a very catchy word in the military, readiness, because we're always ready. So the idea of having a yoga readiness kit is it's basically having a kit that has a mat, a book, or a couple of books, and has other things, a strap, and all this is sponsored by various sponsors, but the coordination comes through the Give Back Yoga Foundation. And this kit is given to military members who want to practice yoga, who have no idea what yoga is, or some who already have practiced yoga. But that kit, the idea of having a kit is when you deploy, you just grab your yoga readiness kit and you bring it with you,
Nice.
and you're ready to practice yoga at any time. So that's basically where the idea comes. And we have some really big corporate sponsors such as Gaiam, etc.
Nice.
But that's the idea of having a ready-to-go yoga kit. Put on your A bag, which is a huge green bag that some of us will take when we deploy and go.
Mm-hmm. See, that is a perfect example of making yoga for the people you're trying to get it to. Like that's the language that the military speaks, and that they have a pack and that they have the things. It's perfect. You just make it fit for that situation, that life, right?
Yes, and I think this is one of the wonderful things about having the best practices for yoga with vets book from the Yoga Service Council, because it really teaches that. I can tell you, it's possible that someone with very artsy can come and be very appealing to many audiences, but I can tell you that if a person comes with another demeanor, I'm more like, hey, let me tell you why yoga works for you. That 5K run you just did this morning, I promise you'll feel much better after you spend 15 minutes with me in the mat. The Marine, the Army guy the Ranger will be like, really? Oh yeah, my physical therapist told me I should practice yoga. There we go. And that opens, remember when earlier I said that opened that little door. So people who can have access to this book will see there are many ways to relate to the military, that language, the readiness yoga kit. Or if I say, when I talk in many settings that are military, because that's my everyday life, right? So when we had the Yoga Fest, believe it or not, we had the Yoga Fest at Southcom, which is the Latin American command there in Miami. And I spoke, and everywhere I went, I would speak to a group of people. And my first thing would be like, okay, let me talk. I'd like to invite you to the Yoga Fest. And let me tell you, yoga is not for sissies. Yoga is not for girls only. It's not a cult. It's not a religion. And people start, really, what is it? And that attracts them. And I tell you what's good for. It's good for calming. It's good for to centering yourself so you can be a better leader. Talk about leadership in the military. People will go like, bees into honey. So you say, well, it really will. Because imagine, and what I tell them, imagine you can be a mindful leader versus an enforceful leader or a dictative leader. You can be a mindful leader. Yeah. You can be more centered. You can be more open. You will feel better. Yeah. And all those things come it speaks to military people. It really does. If you use the right language. And that's why I love the idea of having a book that can assist teachers who want to serve in military communities. Mm-hmm.
Well, what I always call what you just described is you finding your in. Like everybody has an in to yoga, like where it makes sense for them or where it has purpose for them. And as a teacher, if you can find where their in is, if their in is about leadership or their in is about feeling better because they had to do the 5K run, then that's the in for them for the yoga. And to just find where that is and to give it to them there makes it happen. Very cool. Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect place for us to get to the Yoga Service Council. And Carol's been waiting so patiently and sitting there. And
thank you, Carol.
No, thank you. I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity to have Dewey share her story. So thank you. Thanks, both of you.
Yeah. I mean, and so Dewey, when did you start to get more involved, like on a bigger scale, like outside of your own individual sphere of teaching? When did you start to become involved in bigger organizations like you talked about? And how did you get to the Yoga Service Council and meet Carol?
Sure. Well, when I started, remember I told you that we had to write a thesis, so I had to do research. And for 1 year, I went through every yoga for the military training that was available out there. Not only training, but also conferences and little retreats, etc. And I finally found there's one organization, which was my first organization to join, the Mindful Yoga Therapy. I just called the founder, Suzanne. I found her on the internet, and I wrote her, and she actually called me. And when she called, she said, "Hi, Dewey, I got your message on email. How can I help you?" That's exactly how I went. And I said, "Well, I would like to learn a little bit more about what you do because I'm in the military." Long story short, she eventually actually came to Washington, D.C. and taught me one-on-one through trial and error, because she had by then worked several years with the military because she was in a program with the VA. So she knew what was post-traumatic.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.